Henry Kaiser had never seen a ship, not built one, not sailed on one, not by any credible account given the slightest professional thought to anything that floated. He was a road builder, a dam builder, the man who had poured the concrete for the Hoover Dam and the Grand Coulee Dam, two of the largest structures ever erected by human hands. He knew how to move earth and bend rivers. He had no business whatsoever in a shipyard. And yet, in 1942, the United States government handed him the contract to do something that the entire American shipbuilding industry, an industry with 3 centuries of tradition behind it, had declared to be flatly impossible. Build cargo ships faster than German submarines could sink them. He did not merely meet the requirement, he shattered it. By 1944, his network of shipyards was producing 50 merchant vessels a month. He built one of them, a fully operational 10,000-ton cargo ship, in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. From the first keel plate to the moment she slid into San Francisco Bay, 4 days. That ship would go on to serve at Omaha Beach. She would ferry prisoners of war from Casablanca. She would supply ammunition to trapped American soldiers under enemy fire in the Pacific. She was not a stunt. She was a weapon. And she was built by a man who had never seen the sea. This is the story of how the late unpleasantness was not won by a battle, or a general, or a code-breaking machine, but by an ugly, expendable, mass-produced cargo ship called the Liberty, and by the extraordinary man who worked out how to build them. To understand what Kaiser did, you must first understand the problem he was asked to solve. And the problem was, in the plainest possible terms, arithmetic. The Battle of the Atlantic was not a naval engagement in any traditional sense. It was a war of tonnage, a war of statistics, a grinding, remorseless calculation in which the only question that mattered was whether the Allies could float enough ships to keep Britain alive and project military force across 2 oceans. By early 1942, the answer was no. The numbers were devastating. Between 1941 and 1942, Allied forces lost 2,963 ships to enemy action. The United States, at that point, possessed the industrial capacity to replace just 863. The deficit was not a bottleneck, it was a chasm. And the chasm was widening every month. The vulnerability was most extreme along the American eastern seaboard. Between January and August of 1942, 609 merchant ships were sunk in the western Atlantic, many of them sailing independently without convoy protection. In American-patrolled waters, 609 ships in 7 months. In waters the United States was supposed to control, the U-boat commanders called it the second happy time. They were, by any honest assessment, winning. The mathematics were simple and they were brutal. If the Allies could not build ships faster than the Germans could sink them, the war was lost. Not in the trenches, not in the air, in a shipping ledger. Henry Kaiser entered the maritime industry as an outsider. This fact cannot be overstated, because it is the single most important detail in the entire story. Traditional shipbuilding in 1940 was a vertical process. You laid a keel at the bottom of a slipway. You built upward from there, piece by piece, plate by plate, rivet by rivet, over the course of approximately 355 days. The method had not changed in any fundamental respect since the age of sail. It required vast amounts of skilled labor per vessel. And it created an absolute physical bottleneck at the slipway, because only one ship could occupy a berth at a time. Kaiser looked at this process and saw a dam, not literally. But he recognized something that 3 centuries of shipbuilders had failed to recognize, or had refused to consider. A ship is not a unique object. A ship is an assembly of components. And components can be built somewhere else. He stopped building ships. He started assembling them. Kaiser introduced a modular construction system in which the vessel was divided into prefabricated sections, each weighing approximately 250 tons. These sections were manufactured in workshops spread across the surrounding region, complete with pre-installed boilers, wiring, and internal fittings. They arrived at the shipyard on railroad flat cars and were lifted into position at the slipway in a fraction of the time the traditional method required. The effect on production was staggering. The first Liberty ships required 1,400,000 man-hours and 355 days to build. By early 1943, Kaiser had reduced that to under 500,000 man-hours and an average of 41 days. And by 1944, his yards were launching 50 merchant ships every single month. He did not achieve this by being a better shipbuilder. He achieved it by refusing to be a shipbuilder at all. The Liberty ship was not a beautiful vessel. It was not a sophisticated vessel. It was, by the frank admission of its own designers, an ugly duckling, a seagoing boxcar. And that was entirely deliberate. Kaiser understood something that the traditional maritime establishment found deeply uncomfortable. In a war of attrition, perfection is the enemy of survival. A Liberty ship did not need to last 30 years. It did not need to win a design prize. It needed to cross the Atlantic once, deliver 10,000 tons of material, and justify the $1.8 million it had cost to build. If it survived a second crossing, that was a bonus. If it survived 10, that was a miracle. But even one trip was enough. Every engineering decision flowed from this philosophy. Welding replaced riveting because welding was faster. Steel replaced wooden decks. Cement replaced tile in the bathrooms. Oil lamps replaced electric lighting. Firefighting systems were omitted entirely. And the engines were reciprocating triple expansion steam, a technology that was, by 1942, a relic of an older maritime age. Modern turbines were faster and more efficient. They were also in desperately short supply. The triple expansion engine, by contrast, could be manufactured by dozens of companies across the country, companies that had never built a marine engine in their lives. It gave the Liberty ship a top speed of 11 knots. Slow, painfully slow, but available. The ships were sufficient, and sufficient in a war of statistics was enough. In September of 1942, the SS Joseph N. Teal was built in 10 days. President Roosevelt made a secret cross-country train journey to attend her launch. A reporter asked Kaiser a simple question: could it be done faster? Kaiser said it could be done in half the time. The 8th of November, 1942, Richmond Shipyard No. 2, California, 12:01 in the morning. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary is laid, 250,000 individual parts, 14 million pounds of steel. By mid-morning of the first day, the bottom shell units are in place and the boilers are being lowered into the engine room. By the end of the second day, the upper deck is complete. On the third day, the masts, derricks, and pre-assembled superstructure are lifted into position. On the fourth day, the final wiring is connected, the last welds are ground smooth, the paint goes on, and the forward gun platform is installed. At 3:27 in the afternoon, on the 12th of November, the SS Robert E. Peary slides into San Francisco Bay, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. 3 days after that, she was fully operational and delivered for active service. Now, the critics called her a stunt ship, a propaganda exercise. And it was, in part, a propaganda exercise. Kaiser intended it as an incentive build to boost worker morale. But the Peary was not a hollow demonstration. She went to war. During her maiden voyage to the Pacific, the Peary performed a maneuver that no one had planned for. Near a Japanese-held island, under direct enemy fire, her crew brought the ship close to shore and used the deck gun to shoot a line to the beach. Over that line, they supplied trapped American soldiers with ammunition and food until the attack was defeated. She ferried prisoners of war from Casablanca. She served off Omaha Beach on the 7th of June, 1944, delivering supplies under constant attack. Her final voyage took her to Yokohama. She was scrapped in 1963, having outlived by 2 decades the war she was built to survive for a single crossing. There is one part of the Kaiser story that tends to receive less attention than the ships themselves, and it may be the most remarkable part of all. Kaiser faced a catastrophic shortage of skilled labor. The shipbuilding trades had been decimated by the Depression. Experienced welders, fitters, and riveters simply did not exist in the numbers required. The traditional response would have been to slow production until the workforce could be trained. Kaiser did the opposite. He assumed that every single new hire would know nothing. He built the training into the production line itself. He recruited from everywhere. And he ignored every social convention that the American industrial establishment of the 1940s held sacred. By mid-1944, 1 in 4 workers at the Richmond shipyards was a woman, not answering telephones, not filing paperwork, building ships. A former hairstylist named Dorothy Sarrow, who joined the yard at the age of 19, became so proficient at fabricating engine room ladders, one of the most technically demanding tasks in the entire construction process, that her crew was repeatedly pulled from their own assignments to assist other teams who could not get it right. Kaiser hired the best person available, regardless of background. He paid higher wages than comparable industries. And he did something that no other wartime employer had thought to do. He built a healthcare system. The shipyard health plan, created to keep his workers fit and productive, eventually evolved into an organization that still exists today. It is called Kaiser Permanente. It is one of the largest healthcare providers in the United States. It began as a shipyard clinic in Richmond, California, during the late unpleasantness. Let me be clear about what was achieved, because the scale of it tends to get lost in the individual stories. The Liberty Ship program produced 2,710 vessels. Kaiser and his fellow builders also delivered 50 escort aircraft carriers, the so-called baby flat tops. They transformed the construction time for a cargo ship from nearly a year to 41 days on average. They cut the required labor hours by more than 60%. They took an industry that was losing the war and turned it into the single most productive manufacturing operation in human history. When Kaiser needed steel and the government could not supply it fast enough, he built his own mill at Fontana, California. He completed it 5 months ahead of a government-funded U.S. steel plant in Utah, despite the government project having a full year head start. His mill cost less than half as much. That is the Kaiser methodology in a single anecdote. The Liberty ships carried the tanks, the ammunition, the food, and the fuel that made every Allied victory after 1942 physically possible. Without them, there is no D-Day. Without them, there is no liberation of Europe. Without them, the machinery of the Allied cause grinds to a halt somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. And the men who sailed them, the more than 30,000 Allied merchant sailors who did not come home, were not soldiers, they were civilians. Men who died of torpedoes and hypothermia in the most unforgiving waters on the planet so that the ships behind them could get through. Consider what this story tells us. The most important weapon of the late unpleasantness was not a tank or a bomber or an encryption machine. It was an ugly, slow, expendable cargo ship with a steam engine from the previous century and cement floors in the bathrooms. Built by a man who poured dams, assembled by women who had never seen the sea, designed to survive a single voyage. And it won the war. 2 of them are still afloat today. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share.